Hi there, Chris from TotallyEV, and here I'm doing a dedicated audio review of the Hyundai Inster. If you want a detailed review of the vehicle itself, make sure you check it up on your pop-up banner or by following the links down in the description below or the pinned comments. Here you'll also find some of the best deals for the vehicle, and this can also be achieved by scanning the QR code that can be found on your screen. Now, to kick things off, we have to talk about its audio configuration. And at the time of filming, I have not actually been provided any extra information from the manufacturer. However, if I do get it, I'll pop it down as a note or indeed in the video description. But what I can say is that as standard in the 01 model, you have got 4 speakers. One of which is found within each of the 4 doors and is presumed to be woofers or full range drivers. However, if you move over to the 02 trim, which is on review, or the Cross, then you'll find tweeters that are also found within the front mirror triangles, therefore taking the tally up to 6. Now, for you to tinker around with the audio drivers, you want to navigate on the 10.25-inch display, and via the sound settings I have enabled the premium sound, in other words leaving the speed dependent volume as normal, left the position in terms of its center position, and then added 2 notches to treble, 0 to mid-range and 2 notches to bass. Of course, these are my subjective settings, and therefore it might differ in terms of the overall music genre that you listen to, or of course, or more importantly, your own hearing range. Now, for you to connect up to the infotainment system, you have got Bluetooth, where the SBC and AAC codecs are supported only. If, however, you want to achieve higher quality playback, then you will definitely want to plug in your smartphone, because Android Auto and Apple CarPlay are supported over wired transmission. However, as far as I'm aware, wireless support is not there, at least not at the time of filming. So next up we get on to cabin noise, and here the objective measurements will be on your screen. What I will point out, however, is that my measurement tool wasn't exactly able to pick up some of the low-end resonant sound that can be heard when traversing uneven terrain. Bearing in mind I am in the Inster 02 with the 17-inch alloys. And indeed over here I just felt that it was actually relatively noisy when traversing at higher speeds. You've also got a little bit of wind that can be heard deflecting off the relatively chunky or slightly tall A-pillars. Still, in the grand scheme of things, it does go on par with some of its nearest competitors, and if I were to be driving the 01 model, I suspect I would have been able to get slightly lower rolling noise, because that actually has got 15-inch alloys fitted instead. Now, with that said and done, let's get on to an audio demo. I'll be placing the camera and microphone across a few different locations within the cabin and playing back a track. It's from Priya J and is titled Like Me. So I do appreciate an audio demo over YouTube is not the best way to experience the system. However, I thought to provide it as it gives you a bit of a taster as to what to expect. Now, subjectively, as someone who's reviewed over 130 in-car audio systems and over 800 audio-related devices, I'll say that the stock 6-speaker setup does do a decent job across the board and will suffice for your average listener. However, audiophiles will be left a little bit disappointed. Now, let me expand. First off, in terms of the sub-bass tones, in other words that low-end extension and that rumble, it is cut short. And that should come as almost no surprise because it hasn't got a subwoofer. Instead, the audio drivers that are found within each of the 4 doors try and give you a little bit of that extra low-end extension. And by adding 2 notches to the bass EQ, I found that it added a little bit of extra oomph that was needed in some of my tracks. In terms of the overall mid-bass, however, it is actually pretty punchy. And yes, that 2 notches that you add towards the EQ will give you even more bass in your face. Although it's worth pointing out over here that at louder volumes you will be able to hear a little bit of rattle, and that's just due to the fact that you've got quite a lot of plastic that can be found towards the front and rear door trims. Now as for the overall mids, however, they're pretty recessed to say the least. Indeed, both in the lower and the upper mid-range, male and female vocals are severely affected, and therefore don't really come up to the foreground. Now you might be quick to say, why didn't you EQ the mid-range via the infotainment system? And quite simply, by adding 1 or 2 notches, I felt that it gave me a little bit of an artificial reproduction. In other words, kind of that fishbowl and weird veiled effect. And as a result, I just had to deem that the overall audio system is not really capable across the mid-range frequency tones, and therefore will sound pretty recessed and V-shaped. Now on the flip side, the highs do extend relatively well, at least at the front of the cabin. And with 2 notches added to the treble EQ, I had a good sort of toe-tapping feeling. In fact, here I felt that a 1.5 adjustment would have been perfect, at least to my ears. However, I'd had to settle for 2, and therefore have a little bit of extra harshness and sibilance at the top end. It is worth pointing out over here that if you do go for the stock or the entry-level 01 trim, you will not have these dedicated tweeters. And yes, indeed, that's going to affect the overall high-end extension, and therefore feel a little bit cut short, to say the least. Now, as for its overall soundstage reproduction, it's somewhat decent. However, it would have been greatly aided by the manufacturer adding additional audio drivers within the dashboard and also within the rear doors. And indeed, over here, instrument separation does take a little bit of a hit. As for the overall width and depth, it's actually decent, and that's namely due to the fact that you've got a relatively compact cabin, although it can sound sometimes a little bit odd due to the fact you've got a relatively tall ceiling instead, and therefore is a little bit different from the norm per se. Ultimately, what I'm trying to convey over here is that the stock 6-speaker setup in the Hyundai Inster is certainly worth considering upgrading to in comparison to the 4-speaker setup because of those additional tweeters, and therefore it does get our Audio Approved award. However, make no mistake, in terms of more expensive alternatives out there, it can't quite compete, and therefore means that if you're an audiophile who's actually got the Hyundai Inster, you might want to look at some third-party solutions instead. But do bear in mind this might affect your overall warranty, so do consult the manufacturer before doing any sort of changes. Now, if you've enjoyed this detailed independent review, definitely do consider dropping a like, subscribing and hitting that bell notification, all of which would be greatly appreciated. As such, I've been Chris from TotallyEV, and I hope to see you in the next one. Take care of yourselves, and goodbye.